Hey YouTube, and welcome back to the ranch. On this episode, I'm going to be putting together this vivarium in the style of a paludarium. If that's something you think you might be interested in watching, stick around. For this paludarium, it takes a good amount of stuff to get something like this to look like one of these. I want to show you some of the products that I'm going to use, and then we're going to zoom in so that you can get a bird's eye view of everything that I'm doing. To start, let's look at the main hardware. I'm going to be using this Reptile UVB LED. This is going to provide red lights for the plant, white lights for the plant, and also UVB for whatever animal I decide is going to go in here. Inside, I'll be using ZooMed's 10-gallon paludarium filter. Actually, it filled up with nothing but water. This is only about 4 gallons. So having a 10-gallon filter is more than double what I need. So I'm sure I'm going to be able to keep this water crystal clear. Inside the paludarium, because there's going to be water, well, we need somewhere to put the plants, we need somewhere to put the soil and whatnot. The first part that we're going to use is this little paludarium platform made by ZooMed. While all these parts are ZooMed, the enclosure itself is a relatively new Exoterra product, and it's their 12 by 12 by 24 paludarium. Now, ZooMed makes almost an identical product. I choose Exoterra over ZooMed for just one simple reason. I like the double opening doors. ZooMed makes one with a single opening door. What a double opening door allows me to do is if I have an animal in here that's a little bit frisky or more active, I can open one door and work and do what I need to do while keeping the door closed that's on the same side as that animal. Prior to doing any kind of work in here, I installed a drain valve. And it consists of 2 basic parts. A little bulkhead right here. This is for a 1/4 inch tubing. It's basically a 5/8 opening right here. 2 O-rings, one for the outside, one for the inside. Put it through the hole that I had to drill. Squeeze it down nice and tight. And I've got a watertight drain. And then I just take one of these little valves. They connect via tube, and I've got a perfect drain. So what this will allow me to do is to always keep the water level where I need it to be, even though I'm going to have the Mist King spraying water in here a few times a day. These 2 enclosures were constantly filling up with water once I installed the Mist King, and it was like every other day that I'm trying to get the water out. So I just put these on here, and anytime I set up a vivarium from now on, that's going to be a staple. Another bit of electronic that I'm going to be using is one of these fans here. This is a fan designed primarily for computers to exhaust and keep them cool. But what I do with these, as you can see, I put them on top of my vivariums to help pull air through. Part of the design of an Exoterra are these little vents here, so the air flows through there and goes up. And it keeps a constant good airflow, which is important for a lot of animals that live in high humidity areas. They need the humidity, but they also need fresh air flowing through. You can see that it takes this entire table to set this up. Now I may use all of these, I may not use all of them, but what I've got here, I've got this large piece of flat cork bark. It's almost the entire table here. I've got a tube that I can easily cut into various pieces, both as a round and as a semi-round. I've got some of this rainforest moss by Exoterra soaking. I'm going to be using some of the components of the humidity starter kit by Galapagos Pet Supply. I'm definitely going to put this vine in there somewhere. I've got another pretty solid cork flat right here. When I put the vine in, I'm going to use this Exoterra vine and I'm going to kind of blend them together. I have this awesome piece of bark with moss on it. I've got several pieces of wood over here. This is grapevine. This is a piece of what they call spider wood. It's basically the roots of something that turn into driftwood. I've got a piece of manzanita right here that I'm going to try to make a shelf out of. The primary substrate is ABG. This I got from Josh's Frogs. And in the water itself, I'm using Active Flora gravel. It's the same gravel that I'm using in this one, and it already has all the beneficial bacteria happening, so as I put plants in there, it'll stimulate them to grow a little bit faster and a lot healthier. And then finally, I'll be using some of this black foam sealant. This is a waterfall sealant. You can get it at Home Depot or Lowe's. It's just over $10 a can. And this is what I'm going to be using to kind of affix some of the things permanently in this cage. Semi-permanently. You can always go back and scrape it out if you don't like what you've done before. But I just like using the black foam a little bit better. It'll blend in better with the background and the various plant and soil levels that I'll be putting in here. I'm not just going to use the Paludarium platform, I'm going to be making a few other adjustments in here. The first bit of living biomass that's going to go in here will of course be the plants. I acquired my plants in two places. I got the plants that'll be in the non-water section from Josh's Frogs. And then for the water section, there's this really great aquarium store near me. It's called Kona. And I got I got Java moss, a Java fern, and some other kind of longer leafy plants that'll go in the back and just help add that upwards dimension. Now that you're familiar with some of the products that I'll be using to put this together, I'm going to go ahead and zoom you in so you can see everything that I do to create this miniature biological marvel.
Begin this build by putting the Paludarium platform and its stand inside the terrarium to kind of figure out where it needs to go. Unfortunately, the substrate bin had no means of drainage, so I had to drill some holes in here that correspond to holes in the stand. We don't want the roots of the plants In addition to the Paludarium stand, I'm also adding a couple pieces of cork. This will give me more areas to add substrate and plants. Whatever type of animal I decide to put in here, this will give them more land areas than just the platform. I could have used black silicone to hold in these cork flats, but I chose the black waterfall foam because it gives a little bit of extra dimension. Instead of having a perfect hard edge where the cork bonds to the glass, this makes that junction a little more gradual. It was also about this point in the build that I realized this black waterfall foam does not set as quickly as the normal yellow-gray stuff foam. I didn't want to stand here all day, so I had to get creative. My initial solution was to use electrical tape to hold it up, kind of like a suspension bridge. This did hold up the cork flat, but it didn't keep it at the right angle to keep it pressed up against the glass. So next, after the tape, I added a piece of broken cork that I had lying around. And this was the perfect item to brace the cork flat and keep it in place until the foam dried. Learning from my very recent mistake, I used 2 pieces of broken cork to support the second cork flat that I was going to use as an additional planting area. That was just a matter of adding foam, getting it around most, if not all of the edges, and of course, letting it sit there and dry. After about 45 minutes, you can start to mess with the foam. The great part about this stuff is when it gets on the glass in places that you didn't want it, a simple razor blade scrapes it right off. It doesn't take a lot of effort or a lot of strength. It just takes a good sharp blade. To make sure I have plenty of room for substrate and plants, I had to pull out some of the foam once it was completely dried and cured, because it expands a lot. Using a drywall knife, I start cutting little bits and pieces off. The drywall knife has jagged edges, adds texture to the outside of the foam versus the smooth, round texture that it naturally dries at. I decided that I didn't want to put the platform in there the same way that I'd seen on every other build for one of these paludariums. Everyone I've ever seen has the platform pushed into the back and plants going up that way. I got the idea to put it in sideways, but to accomplish this, I was going to have to cut out a rather large piece of the foam from the back. A little extra trimming, and it fits perfect. Cleaning a little bit at a time as I'm doing the project instead of having to clean it all up at once at the very end. So now at this point, I'm adding in some of the gravel that I have as a drainage layer in the areas where substrate will be placed. Once I've got the drainage layer in there, I go ahead and put in my ABG. Now, a word of advice, ABG comes in a bag, but it's about 4 different products. So you've got to put it into something and mix it up. You can see I just used a small 2.5 gallon bucket and mixed it up by hand to get it nice and thoroughly mixed. After I've got all of my substrate in above, I take larger rocks and I put them around my drain valve. I don't want small pieces of gravel to get stuck in the drain, thereby making my valve completely useless. Now that I've got my drainage layer and substrate added, I'm going to go ahead and start putting in some of the plants. I begin by adding the baby tiers. I purchased the 12 by 12 by 18 kit. While there was only 4 potted plants, I was able to take the baby tiers and pull them apart at the roots to make 3 separate pieces. I was able to do the same with the fern that they sent. This really helps you spread out and maximize these spaces that will have living plants in your vivarium. After adding the nerve plant, I move on to my last leafy plant, which is a ripple plant. This particular one is a red emerald ripple plant. While I was able to break this into multiple pieces, I set them together kind of close to each other because I thought these would look really good on the back wall. Also a product I purchased from Josh's Frogs. I'm using live moss here to help retain moisture in the areas where I put the potted plants. This moss is sheet moss, and it comes in 1 or 2 quarts when you purchase it from Josh's Frogs. While functionally, the moss will help retain moisture beneath it, visually, of course it looks great, it makes you think tropical, but I'm able to put it towards the edges to help break up some of the right angles of the cork flats that I've cut, as well as the Paludarium platform itself. So you can see it gets rid of those hard edges. And now for the final non-aquatic plants, I'm putting in the bromeliads. course, when building a vivarium like this with live plants, there's no right or wrong spot to place the plants that you intend to grow inside of your vivarium. Having put in all the plants, I'm now adding a hole to the screen for the misting system. I cut a small X with scissors and then take the misting nozzle and push it through that hole. Because the screen is metal, it's strong enough to hold up the nozzles. I cut the existing line that goes from my mossy frogs to my mossy geckos, and I plug the lines into this one. This helps maintain the circuit in my Mist King system. Moving on now to the water area, I'm adding in the active flora gravel. I want the plants to take root and really establish themselves. I add a nice thick layer down here. I also purchased 2 bags and only ended up using 1. If you're wondering what that spade-shaped device that I'm using, it's a tool that I've seen used in aquascaping videos. You can pick up something similar at any aquarium stores, and some pet stores now carry aquascaping tools like this. With the substrate now in there and put exactly where I wanted, I start adding the plants. I wanted to put something on the bottom that was going to establish itself and create a carpeting layer, so I begin by putting in dwarf hairgrass. The great thing about this is, just like the non-aquatic plants, you can pull these apart and get a lot more starters out of the individual. I take another piece of spider wood and put it in the bottom to add an air of continuity to the top and bottom. By putting Java moss in some of the nooks and crannies of this piece of driftwood, it'll adhere itself and it'll give the driftwood the appearance of living wood. After the Java moss, I put in the Java fern that I've also broken into multiple pieces. I use a non-toxic glue to adhere a piece of the Java fern on a higher branch of that spider wood. Finally, I begin putting in
Reptile indica.
Another tool that you might see me use are these fine tip tweezers. They are another aquascaping specific tool. They're similar to what you would use to feed your reptiles, but the ends aren't rubber coated. Instead, they're very pointy, and that allows you to go deep into a substrate, but then pull them out without pulling the plant with you. Now all that's really left is just adding water. To determine the volume of water, I used a simple math equation. I got the volume in cubic inches of the water section. So all you have to do is measure length times width times height and come up with your number. Whatever number you come up with, you divide by 231, because there are 231 cubic inches in a gallon of water. I determined that the water section of this paludarium was just over 4 gallons. I pour the water over the plant areas. That way it gives a good initial soaking to the substrate, which will help the roots start to develop and start to reach out and grip into the substrate. After giving the paludarium several days to let the plants establish and let all the particulates settle out of the water or be filtered out, this is the final product. You can see that I've added a light beneath the paludarium platform. I realized it was very dark under here. Adding the light not only supports the plant growth, but also just adds a really nice visual touch to the overall aesthetic of this paludarium. I'll leave you now with a short video tour of this mini naturescape. Remember, if you found this video interesting, go ahead and give it a like. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.